We can't accommodate that today. I'm sorry, but the account's been flagged. The words landed flat under the bakery's fluorescent lights, and nobody looked up except the man waiting by the pickup counter with a black coffee going cold in his hand. Maren Ellery set the blue box back down before the clerk could ring it up, and said she understood, though her voice had the careful evenness of someone holding a door shut against wind. 3 weeks from that morning, she would stand in a boardroom and watch the same flag get pulled off her name in front of 9 people who'd spent a month believing it belonged there. She didn't know that yet. Neither did he. Stay through to the end. It's worth it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Storiez Tales before we start. Wade Ferris had been in Copper Falls for 14 months, long enough that the hardware store clerk knew his name and the mail carrier waved instead of checking the address twice. He'd bought the old Hollis house on Birch Lane the way some men buy a project instead of admitting they need one, cash, no inspection contingency, a roofline that sagged in the middle like it was tired of holding itself up. He was replacing that roofline himself, one Saturday at a time, when he wasn't at the auto shop 3 days a week fixing transmissions for people who had no idea he used to design them. His daughter, Nora, was 9, and narrated the world from wherever she happened to be standing. A hawk over the ridge. A dog that clearly needed water. A man arguing with a parking meter like it could hear him. Wade listened the way he always did, half his attention on her, half of it somewhere further back, in a life he'd stopped explaining to people years ago. They'd moved to Copper Falls the spring after Nora's mother died. He told the one neighbor who asked that he liked working with his hands. That much, at least, was true. What he didn't say was that a roof needing this much work was the point, something with a clear beginning and a clear end, unlike almost everything else he'd walked away from. That evening he'd gone into Ellery's bakery for the coffee, which was better than it had any right to be in a town this size, and he'd been standing at the counter when the woman in the gray coat set her box down and asked, quietly, to cancel it. He didn't know her name yet. He knew the shape of what he'd watched, the practiced calm, the thank you offered like the cancellation was routine, the hand that hadn't held steady signing the slip anyway. He asked the owner, Deb, to put the order back through. Same cake, same name on the ticket, paid in full, and asked her not to say who'd done it. She didn't leave an address, Deb said. I'll find it, Wade told her, and did, 20 minutes later, off the delivery slip the clerk hadn't thrown away yet. Nora was waiting for him outside on the bench, still in her soccer cleats, swinging her legs. She'd seen a dog cross the street twice, a boat trailer backing in wrong, a man drop his keys down a storm drain. Wade listened to all of it on the drive home, to the house on Birch Lane that still smelled like sawdust in every room. He made dinner while Nora did homework at the kitchen island, grilled cheese, because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was grilled cheese, a rule Nora had invented and Wade had never once bothered to break. After she went to bed, he sat on the back porch with a beer he didn't finish, listening to the creek 2 blocks down, and thought about a woman he'd spoken maybe 6 words to in his life, and how long it had been since something outside his own house had held his attention past dinner. Maren Ellery ran Copper Basin Freight, 41 trucks and a rail yard her grandfather had built out of a single flatbed lease in 1962. She had a 10-year-old son, Tobias, a color-coded calendar on the fridge, and, as of that morning, an operating account frozen without warning and a customer service line that kept using the word hold like it wasn't a decision someone had made on purpose. The call had come at 9 that morning. Copper Basin Freight Operating Trust temporarily suspended pending internal review. No further detail offered. She'd asked to speak to someone above the representative and been told someone would call her back. She ran the numbers twice at her desk before lunch, and both times they came out the same way, enough in the company accounts to keep the trucks running, nothing in her own name she could touch without the trust's approval, and a birthday 2 days away that had suddenly become the one bill she couldn't figure out how to pay. She fed Tobias dinner, checked his homework, and did not tell him she'd spent the afternoon on the phone being told someone would call her back. No one had. At 7:40, a van from Ellery's bakery pulled up outside. The driver set a blue box on the porch, said it was already taken care of, and drove off before she could ask by whom. She opened it under the porch light. Tobias's cake, the one she'd cancelled that afternoon with her own signature. No card. No name. She stood there a long moment, and for the first time in longer than she could easily place, she let herself cry without deciding first whether it was allowed. 3 days later she went back to the bakery to settle a bill she already knew had been paid, and asked Deb, carefully, who'd reordered it. Man comes in most mornings, Deb said, wiping flour off her forearms. Works on old houses. Wade Ferris. She hesitated, then added, like it wasn't quite hers to say, funny thing, I heard he used to run some engineering firm up north. Real money. Now he's out here reframing roofs for people half his age. Lost his wife a couple years back. Keeps to himself, mostly, except for that girl of his. Marin didn't say anything to that. She thanked Deb and walked, with no plan for what she'd say, to a job site 2 blocks over. She found him on a ladder, cedar shingles stacked on the lawn, sawdust catching the morning light. He came down when he saw her. You paid for the cake, she said. Not a question. Deb talks, he said. Not quite a confirmation, not quite a denial. Why? He thought about it longer than she expected. Because a birthday shouldn't be the thing that gets cancelled, he said. Whatever else is going on. Neither of them reached for small talk after that. A business card slid out of his open toolbox when he turned for a level, landed face up in the dirt between them, cream stock, a logo she didn't recognize, and underneath it, small type, Ferris Klein Structural, Wade A. Ferris, founder. He picked it up without comment. She didn't ask, though she wanted to, and walked back to her car with a question sitting in her chest the whole way. What does a man who used to run an engineering firm want with a hammer and a stack of shingles? The following Tuesday, Denny Okafor called an emergency session of the Copper Basin Freight Board. 9 seats around a table Marin sat at only because her grandfather had sat there for 30 years before her. Denny stood the way he always did when he wanted a room to feel like a courtroom. I want to be clear, this isn't personal, he said, which was usually how his most personal sentences began. He laid out numbers, a shipment delay in March, a client account lost to a competitor 2 states over, a cash position he called concerning, without ever saying to whom. He proposed a governance review, a suspension of Marin's operational authority during that review, and a freeze on trust disbursements tied to her equity until the picture was clearer. 3 board members nodded before Marin had finished responding. She understood then that this had already been discussed in rooms she hadn't been invited into. She argued the numbers anyway, argued the timeline, kept her voice level the way her grandfather had taught her, argue a losing point slower, never louder. The board scheduled a formal vote for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks for Denny to build his case. 3 weeks for Marin to find one of her own, or lose the company that had started on 1 truck and a signature. Wade's phone rang while he was up on scaffolding, a name he hadn't heard in 2 years. Priya Nandan, who used to handle disclosure filings for Ferris Klein back when Ferris Klein still existed. Somebody mentioned your name in connection with Copper Basin Freight, Priya said. Thought you'd want to know. People are still asking. I'm not involved in that, Wade said, and meant it. He climbed back up the ladder and didn't think about it again until that night, lying awake, the name Copper Basin Freight refusing to go back under. He worked out why a company he had no stake in kept circling back to him, and came up with one honest answer, and didn't much like how simple it was. He got up once, quietly, and stood in the hallway outside Nora's door, listening to her breathe, the way he still did most nights even though she'd long since stopped needing it. Whatever he decided to do about Copper Basin Freight, it would touch this house too, and he'd promised himself 2 years ago that nothing from his old life would get to do that again. He'd built this quiet on purpose, on the idea that the version of himself who used to sit across tables from men like Denny Okafor was someone he'd outgrown. It had never once occurred to him that the skill wouldn't disappear just because he'd stopped using it. Nora's class put on a spring program the following week, songs, a very earnest recitation about tectonic plates, and Nora had told her teacher her dad was coming, and Tobias had told his mother the same, and both boys ended up seated 2 rows apart, their parents meeting by accident in the gymnasium doorway. "Small town," Wade said, and Maren almost laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. Afterward, in the parking lot, they talked, real conversation, longer than either of them meant it to run, about the roof, about how long Tobias had been asking for a dog, about the Saturday farmers market neither of them had been to in months. Neither one touched the last 3 weeks. Their hands nearly met reaching for the same door handle, and both pulled back half a second too fast, the kind of overcorrection that says more than contact would have. That night, after Tobias was asleep, Maren searched Ferris Klein Structural. Mostly dead links and a handful of trade journal archives, the kind that thin out when a company dissolves quietly instead of collapsing loudly. One line stayed with her: founder Wade Ferris stepped back from operations following a personal loss. No confirmed timeline for return. She closed the laptop without reading further, some instinct telling her this wasn't information to go digging for out of a stranger's biography. She noticed, brushing her teeth, that she was smiling about the gymnasium doorway and nothing else that had happened that day. 2 weeks before the board vote, Denny hosted what he called a community appreciation event down at the rail yard, a band, more reporters than the occasion strictly warranted, half the company's investors within earshot of him saying, stabilizing leadership, with a hand on someone's shoulder each time. Maren had to speak with an hour's notice and no prepared remarks. She kept it short, thanked the yard crew by name, talked about the single flatbed lease the way she always did when she needed the room to remember whose company this actually was. She sat down to applause that felt more like relief, and caught Denny watching her with an expression that didn't match his clapping hands. Wade was 200 yards down the yard, contracted to repair a section of loading dock that had been rotting long before the event was scheduled. Close enough to hear most of it over his own saw. Something in the back of his memory turned over slowly, like a name trying to surface from underwater. It came to him at sundown, driving Nora home. Denny Okafor, 9 years back, a logistics roll-up out of a different state that had come across Ferris Klein's desk looking for a growth round. Wade had passed on it personally after his diligence team flagged receivables that never got a satisfactory explanation, no matter how many times they asked. Different title then, different name on the card, same rehearsed warmth, same habit of saying, to be clear, right before something wasn't. He pulled over on the shoulder, engine idling, and called Priya back. "That name you mentioned, Denny Okafor. I need you to look into something for me." Quietly. Nora, in the back seat, asked why they'd stopped. He told her he just needed to make a call, and she went back to narrating the boats on the water, and that was the whole of what she ever knew about any of it. He drove the rest of the way home turning the same thought over, and pulled into the driveway on Birch Lane, and sat there a moment before going inside, the porch light catching the dust still on his forearms. Priya called back 2 days later with a single line that told him everything he needed and nothing he wanted. "Same pattern as the roll-up," she said. Wade sat with that a long moment before he called Copper Basin Freight's office and left a message asking Maren to call him back, no explanation given, and spent the rest of the evening deciding how much of the truth he was willing to hand a woman he'd known for a matter of weeks. Renata Cho hadn't slept well in 11 days, and on the 12th she stopped fighting it. She met Maren in a diner parking lot 2 towns over, where nobody from Copper Basin Freight would recognize either car, and brought a folder she'd been carrying since before the board meeting that started all of this. "I should have shown you this a long time ago," Renata said. "There's a confidentiality clause in my contract. Denny drafted it himself. I have 2 kids and a mortgage, and I told myself that was reason enough to stay quiet. It wasn't." Inside, a copy of the trust amendment Denny had cited as grounds for the freeze, next to a copy of the same document pulled from the trust's own archived records, filed 4 years earlier, before a single signature on it had been altered. The comparison wasn't subtle once you knew to look. Maren's grandfather's signature sat 2 millimeters higher on the version Denny had presented, the pen pressure too even, too clean, the kind of consistency that comes from software instead of a hand. "He didn't just freeze your money," Renata said quietly. "He forged the reason he was allowed to." Marin sat in her car a long time after Renata left, the folder open on her lap, crying in a way she hadn't since her grandfather's funeral, not from fear this time, but from the particular grief of realizing a dead man had never intended to leave her powerless, and someone had spent months making it look otherwise. Wade pulled up to the same diner to collect Nora, and caught the tail end of it through an open car window, enough to know something had broken loose, not enough to know what. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know," Marin said. "But I think I need to tell someone who knows how to read a forged signature." Wade was quiet a second too long. "I might know somebody." "Is it you?" she asked. "The somebody?" He didn't answer right away, and the not answering was its own kind of answer. Over the following days, Priya worked the document the way she used to work fraud cases before she left the industry. Pressure curves, metadata buried in the digital scan Renata had pulled before Denny locked the file, dates cross-referenced against a court record from that roll-up 9 years earlier, where the same forensic pattern had already been flagged once. By the end of the week she had a report Marin's own lawyer said would hold up anywhere she needed it to. The board vote arrived on schedule. Denny stood, 3 sentences into his case for formalizing Marin's suspension, when the conference room door opened and a man in work boots, still faintly dusted with sawdust, walked to the front of the room. "My name is Wade Ferris," he said. "Some of you know me as the contractor working on the old Hollis place. Fewer of you know that before that, I founded and ran a structural engineering firm called Ferris Klein, and that 9 years ago, we declined to invest in a company this man," he nodded once toward Denny, "was raising capital for, because our diligence team found ledger irregularities we never got a satisfactory explanation for. I have a forensic document examiner's report showing the same pattern in the trust amendment Mr. Okafor presented to this board 3 weeks ago." Marin sat very still, watching a man she'd shared a gymnasium bench with become, in real time, someone she hadn't fully known she was standing next to. An older board member who'd served with Marin's grandfather for a decade asked Wade directly why he was involving himself in a company he had no formal connection to. "Because I watched a woman cancel her son's birthday cake because someone made sure she couldn't afford it," Wade said. "And then I watched the same someone stand in a rail yard talking about stabilizing leadership. I don't have a stake in this company. I have an opinion about people who do that to families." Denny's objections came fast and got smaller with each one. When the vote came, it wasn't close, 8-1. The board removed Denny Okafor pending a full independent investigation and restored Marin's complete authority, effective that hour. Denny left without looking at anyone. The week that followed moved the way crises resolve once the truth finally has somewhere to land. An independent investigator was retained within 2 days. 2 clients who'd quietly begun exploring other carriers called Marin personally to say they were staying, now that they understood what had actually been happening behind the numbers Denny had been showing them. Marin found Wade in the hallway afterward, still in his work boots. "You could have told me," she said. "Not angry. Just tired and honest." "I know. Why didn't you?" He leaned against the wall. "After my wife died, I didn't want Nora growing up around what money does to people when there's enough of it. I didn't leave because I was ashamed of it. I left because I didn't like who I was becoming close to it. I wasn't hiding from you specifically. I was just out of practice being that person. Some days I still am." Marin reached over and took his hand, held it 3 or 4 seconds, no longer, and let go. "Thank you," she said. "For the cake. And for this. You'd have gotten there without me. Maybe. But I didn't have to do it alone. That's different, even if the ending's the same." The story made the local paper 2 days later, a short piece about a governance dispute resolved, a company moving forward under its founding family. Wade's name appeared once, no photograph attached. He read it at his kitchen counter, coffee going cold, and felt for the first time in 2 years that being seen hadn't cost him anything he wasn't willing to spend. Copper Basin Freight settled into its new rhythm. The board formalized Renata Cho into a director-level compliance role, 3 years overdue. Denny's name came off the letterhead, and eventually off the company altogether. Nora and Tobias kept being friends the way kids do when nobody makes it complicated. Bikes, a shared obsession with a video game neither parent fully understood, afternoons at the yard watching Wade rebuild the loading dock with the specific fascination boys have for tools they aren't allowed to touch yet. Marin started finding reasons to be at that yard. A coffee run that happened to pass by. A question about a property line that could easily have been a phone call. A stretch of new decking she claimed to want to see finished, though she came back 3 more times after it already was. Neither of them named it out loud, and both seemed to understand that naming it too early would have made it smaller instead of bigger. Renata found her by the water one afternoon and stood beside her a moment, following her line of sight toward the loading dock. "The staff has a theory about you too," she said. "I don't want to hear it," Marin said, though she was smiling when she said it. "Didn't think you would." Renata bumped her shoulder and went to go referee an argument between the boys over a bag of water balloons someone shouldn't have brought. One evening in early June, she stayed until the light went orange over the water. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "To what you used to do?" Wade considered it. "Every now and then. Then I watch Nora catch a ball and I don't think about it very long. What about you? Ever think about walking away from all of it?" "Every now and then. Then I remember my grandfather leased one truck with money he didn't have, and I figure I owe it more than a bad month. For what it's worth," he said, "I don't regret walking into that boardroom. I thought I would. I don't." "Good," Marin said. "Because I wasn't going to let you take it back, even if you did." That pulled a real laugh out of him, the first one she'd heard that wasn't half-swallowed or aimed at one of the kids. Copper Basin Freight threw Tobias's birthday party 3 weeks later than it should have happened, and nobody minded once they saw what the company put together: string lights over the yard, half his class running across the grass in the June heat. Deb came to set up the cake herself, waving off help until Wade showed up anyway and started moving tables without being asked. When it came time for the candles, both boys insisted on blowing them out together, and everyone allowed it. Wade came to stand beside Marin, close enough that his shoulder rested against hers, and neither of them moved away from it this time. "Good cake," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "You'd know." The first cake he'd ever bought had been for a boy he'd never met, paid for without his name attached to any part of it. This one, he helped carry to the table himself, in daylight, in front of everyone, for a family that had somehow, without either of them deciding it on purpose, become his own. Neither of them had been looking for this. If this story moved you, subscribe to Velvet Storiez Tales for more.